From the moment I could form memories, my life was a series of sacrifices, small yet devastating losses that chipped away at my sense of self. The earliest wound I can recall was on my 5th birthday, a day that should have been filled with joy and celebration. My parents gifted me a red bicycle, the one I had dreamed of for months. For a fleeting moment, I felt like the luckiest child in the world. But happiness in my family always came with an expiration date. Diana, my younger sister, took one look at the bike and declared it hers. Without hesitation, my mother turned to me, her voice cold as ice. "You're being selfish, Margaret. Diana is your little sister. Can't you sacrifice just this once?" That phrase, "can't you sacrifice?" became the anthem of my childhood, a relentless demand that stripped me of everything I loved. I tried to protest, tears streaming down my face, but my words were drowned out by their indifference. It wasn't just the bike. It was everything. When I entered elementary school, the pencil case I received as a congratulatory gift became another casualty. Dinah wanted it, so I was forced to trade it for an old, worn-out one. "Diana is still young," my mother explained, as if that justified taking away the things I cherished. The injustice wasn't limited to material possessions. Every aspect of my life revolved around serving Diana. On nights when I was sick with fever, they still made me tutor her before I could rest. Once, during a particularly bad flu, I collapsed in the kitchen while preparing breakfast for Diana's piano exam. No one came to check on me until hours later. When I finally mustered the courage to ask why I was treated so unfairly, my father's response cut deeper than any blade. "If you can't even share something as simple as a pencil case, don't blame us for not treating you like our daughter." These moments replay in my mind like a broken record, each memory amplifying the pain of being invisible in my own family. While Diana basked in their adoration, I was left to navigate a world where my needs didn't matter. Their blind devotion to her wasn't just unfair, it was suffocating. And though I tried to fight back, every attempt was met with scorn and dismissal. I learned early on that resistance only brought more punishment. So I swallowed my anger, burying it deep inside, hoping one day I'd find a way out of this toxic cycle. The unfairness in my family wasn't just about material possessions. It was a suffocating pattern of neglect and forced sacrifice. While Diana basked in their adoration, I became her unwilling servant, expected to cater to her every need. Every evening, after finishing my own homework, I had to tutor Diana, ensuring she stayed ahead in school. My parents never once considered that I might also have dreams or ambitions, dreams they crushed without hesitation. When I expressed interest in swimming lessons, they dismissed me outright. "We're spending money on Diana's piano lessons," my mother said coldly. "Besides, Diana would feel lonely without you." Their obsession with Diana extended far beyond extracurricular activities. They spared no expense for her. Piano, ballet, painting money flowed freely for her passions. Meanwhile, I wasn't allowed to join any clubs outside of school. Even when I came first in a race during sports day, no one noticed because Dinah had fallen and cried during the event. The same indifference followed me through 6th grade when I was elected class representative. I didn't even bother telling my parents. I knew the conversation would inevitably circle back to Diana. One night stands out vividly in my memory, a night that encapsulated everything wrong with our family dynamic. I was running a high fever, my body weak and trembling under the weight of illness. Yet, when morning arrived, my mother shook me awake. "Diana has an important piano exam today," she said sternly. "Get up and make breakfast." I stumbled into the kitchen, my vision blurred, and began preparing food while fighting waves of dizziness. As I cracked eggs onto the pan, the room spun violently. The last thing I remember is collapsing onto the cold tile floor. Hours later, I woke up alone in my bed, still in my pajamas with no one checking on me. It turned out Diana had found me and simply dragged me to my room before continuing with her day as if nothing happened. These moments weren't isolated incidents. They were the fabric of my childhood. My parents' blind devotion to Diana robbed me of not only my belongings, but also my dignity and sense of self-worth. Their actions left scars deeper than words could heal, shaping the person I am today. But even then, I couldn't foresee how this toxic favoritism would escalate into something far more destructive years later. By the time I entered university, I had long given up on expecting kindness from anyone. My family had conditioned me to believe that love was conditional, something you earned only if you sacrificed everything for others. But then I met Ken at the windsurfing club during my freshman year. He was everything my family wasn't: patient, supportive, and genuinely interested in who I was. At first, I hesitated to even try surfing. The waves terrified me, not just because they were unpredictable, but because failure felt like an inevitable part of my life. On my very first day, I was thrown off the board countless times. Salt water burned my eyes, and frustration clawed at my chest as I struggled to stand. Just when I thought about giving up, a massive wave crashed over me, pulling me under. Panic surged through my veins as I flailed beneath the surface, certain I wouldn't make it back up. Then, strong hands grabbed mine, yanking me out of the water. Gasping for air, I looked up to see Ken's calm face. "You're okay?" he said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. That moment changed something inside me. For the first time, someone didn't dismiss my struggles or mock my failures. They saved me. Ken became my anchor, both literally and figuratively. Every evening after practice, we'd sit by the shore, talking about our dreams. He encouraged me to embrace the unpredictability of the waves, teaching me how to read their movements and trust myself. "Feel the rhythm of the ocean," he'd say. "It's not about fighting it, it's about moving with it." Those words resonated deeply, not just in surfing, but in life. With Ken, I discovered a sense of freedom I'd never known. Surfing became more than a sport. It symbolized escape from the suffocating expectations of my family and the loneliness that had haunted me for years. When I finally introduced Ken to my parents, I hoped foolishly that they might approve. Instead, their reaction cut deeper than any insult ever had. My mother sneered, "Do you really think someone like him can take care of you? Look at his clothes, he doesn't even own a car." Her disdainful tone echoed in my ears long after the visit ended. Ken, sensing my devastation, pulled me aside later that night. "Margaret," he said softly, holding my hand, "their opinion doesn't define us. We build our own future together." His unwavering belief in me was a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. As months passed, our bond grew stronger. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ken turned to me. "This is where we belong," he said, gesturing toward the endless expanse of water. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just talking about the sea, he meant us. Together, we were creating something beautiful, far removed from the toxicity of my past. Ken gave me hope, love, and a reason to dream again. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that happiness could be mine. Building a life together wasn't just about dreams, it was about survival. When Ken and I decided to turn our passion for marine sports into a business, we knew it wouldn't be easy. But nothing could have prepared us for the sheer weight of challenges that came crashing down on us in those early years. Our first office was a cramped second-hand apartment 30 minutes from the nearest train station. The furniture desks, chairs, even the filing cabinets was salvaged from flea markets and online classifieds. "This is our starting line," Ken joked one evening as he hammered together a wobbly bookshelf. His optimism kept me going, even when the reality felt suffocating. The real blow came during our first year. A supplier we trusted turned out to be a fraud. They vanished with half of our startup capital, leaving us scrambling to keep the company afloat. We sold everything we owned: my jewelry, Ken's watch, even the vintage surfboard he'd cherished since college. For months, we slept on the floor of the office, wrapped in thin blankets, too broke to afford rent for both living space and workspace. Every morning, I woke up with stiff muscles and dark circles under my eyes, but Ken's unwavering determination pushed me forward. "We'll make it through this," he'd say, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around us. But the universe seemed determined to test us further. One evening, while repairing the roof of the vacation home we had finally saved enough to buy, Ken slipped and fell. I heard the sickening crack before I saw him lying motionless on the ground below. Panic surged through me as I dialed emergency services, my hands trembling so violently I could barely press the numbers. At the hospital, the doctor delivered the grim news: a broken leg requiring surgery and weeks of recovery. As if things weren't dire enough, the accident left me juggling two impossible roles, caring for Ken and keeping the fragile business alive. I spent countless nights sitting by Ken's bedside, updating spreadsheets on my laptop while monitoring his foredrip. By day, I handled client meetings, negotiated contracts, and managed inventory, all tasks I barely understood at the time. There were moments when despair threatened to consume me. Late one night, after yet another rejection from a potential partner, I collapsed onto the cold office floor, tears streaming down my face. Ken, still recovering, hobbled over using crutches and pulled me into his arms. "Margaret," he whispered, "we've already come so far. Don't give up now." His words reignited something inside me, a stubborn refusal to let all our sacrifices go to waste. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. We attended marine sports tournaments, networking tirelessly until we earned the trust of athletes and manufacturers alike. Our breakthrough came when we met a small Australian manufacturer eager to expand into the US market. Their faith in us felt like a lifeline, and we poured every ounce of energy into making the partnership work. That first contract didn't just save our business, it validated every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every tear shed along the way. Looking back, I realize how much those early struggles shaped us. They taught me resilience, patience, and the true meaning of partnership. Ken and I weren't just building a company, we were building a future together. And though the road was littered with obstacles, each challenge only strengthened our bond. When we finally moved into the vacation home 5 years later, standing on its deck and gazing at the ocean, I knew we had earned every inch of happiness. The scars of our journey remained, invisible but indelible, reminders of how far we'd come and how much we'd overcome. The morning after I returned from my business trip, the phone rang. It was my father. His voice carried a strange mix of forced calm and desperation. "Margaret, we need to talk," he began. My stomach tightened instantly. Something in his tone told me this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. "What is it?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was already pounding. "It's about your vacation home," he said hesitantly. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "What about it?" I managed to choke out, dread pooling in my stomach. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he launched into a rehearsed explanation. Dinah had failed at yet another investment scheme, this time racking up $200,000 in debt, and they needed money to save her. "We've already sold the vacation home. The ownership transfer will take place next month." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to process what he'd just said. Sold the vacation home? The very thought felt like a betrayal too deep to comprehend. "You did what?" I finally spat out, my voice trembling with rage. Before I could demand answers, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. A cold, menacing voice greeted me. "If you don't sign those papers, you'll regret it. Family loyalty goes a long way, but so does pressure." My blood ran cold. They weren't just threatening me. They were hired thugs sent by my own parents to intimidate me into compliance. I called my father back immediately, fury bubbling over. "How could you do this? You forged our signatures? You brought criminals into this?" My voice shook with disbelief and anger. But instead of apologizing, my father's response was chilling. "We're family, Margaret. Family sacrifices for each other. If you won't help Diana, then you're no daughter of ours." His words cut deeper than any blade. Sacrifice? This wasn't sacrifice. It was theft, betrayal, and manipulation all rolled into one. That night, as I stood on the balcony of the vacation home, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned white, I made my decision. I wouldn't let them get away with this, not this time. Every fiber of my being screamed for justice. Ken found me there, silent tears streaming down my face. "Margaret," he said softly, pulling me into his arms. "You've done nothing wrong. What they've done, it's criminal." His words solidified my resolve. The next morning, I contacted the police. It wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about drawing a line, protecting everything Ken and I had built together and refusing to be complicit in their destruction. When I first walked into the police station, I was met with skepticism. "This is a family matter," the officer said dismissively, pushing my report aside. "We don't handle disputes between relatives." My heart sank, but I refused to back down. For days, I returned to the station, armed with documents and evidence of forgery fake signatures, falsified ownership papers, and even the threatening calls from the thugs my parents had hired. Still, they hesitated. "Miss Moore, these things happen in families. Are you sure you want to take this route?" Their words stung, but I knew I couldn't let them twist the truth. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was a crime. Desperate, I sought free legal advice from a pro bono lawyer who specialized in property fraud. She helped me draft a formal complaint and guided me through the process of escalating the case. It took nearly a week of relentless persuasion before the police finally agreed to investigate. As the officers began digging deeper, shocking revelations surfaced. My parents had secretly transferred part of the sale proceeds directly into Diana's account. The money was meant to fund yet another dubious investment scheme, one that promised guaranteed returns, but reeked of fraud. The day the police questioned my parents, I received a frantic call from my mother. "How could you do this to your own family?" She screamed, her voice trembling with panic. "Do you hate us that much?" Her accusations cut deep, but what hurt more was their refusal to acknowledge the gravity of their actions. During the interrogation, my father tried to shift the blame entirely onto Diana. "She begged us. What choice do we have?" He cried as if desperation excused theft and forgery. But the law doesn't bend for excuses, and neither would I. As the investigation unfolded, I realized how far my parents had fallen not just legally, but morally. They had crossed lines I never imagined they would, all in the name of family loyalty. Yet, standing firm felt like the only way to protect everything Ken and I had built. Love shouldn't come at the cost of justice. The investigation unfolded like a storm, tearing apart the fragile facade my parents had clung to for years. During the interrogation, they were forced to confront their own actions, forging signatures, lying to real estate agents, and spreading false rumors about me to justify selling our vacation home. Hours of relentless questioning took its toll. Midway through, my father collapsed from a heart attack. The paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but even then, I didn't waver. My mother called me that night, her voice trembling with rage. "How could you do this? He's in the hospital because of you." Neighbors whispered behind my back, calling me ungrateful, cruel, even heartless. One elderly woman stopped me at the supermarket, her eyes cold with judgment. "Your parents are ruined because of you. Do you feel proud now?" Her words stung, but I stood firm. This wasn't just about me, it was about holding them accountable for years of reckless decisions fueled by their blind devotion to Diana. Their downfall wasn't my doing. It was the inevitable consequence of choices made long before I reported them. Diana's desperation reached a fever pitch one late night when she called me, her voice shrill and hysterical. "You've killed our family. You destroyed everything." She screamed into the phone. "Do you know Mom cries herself to sleep every night? She can't stop blaming herself all because of you. How could you be so evil?" Her accusations cut deep, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little she understood responsibility. To her, I was the villain while she remained the helpless victim, a role she perfected over decades of manipulation. When the court delivered its verdict, my parents received suspended sentences for attempted fraud. It should have been a relief, but instead it marked the beginning of their descent into poverty. They sold the family home to cover debts, moving into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. My mother juggled 3 part-time jobs packing goods in warehouses, working cash registers at supermarkets, and cleaning offices late at night. Neighbors often saw her scavenging discount bins for soon-to-expire food, her once proud demeanor replaced by exhaustion and shame. Yet, despite their struggles, I refused to intervene. Every call from relatives begging me to help fell on deaf ears. They need to face the consequences of their actions, I told Ken, who supported me unwaveringly. Watching my parents' world crumble wasn't satisfying, it was heartbreaking. But it was also necessary. For too long, they had shielded Diana from accountability, enabling her destructive behavior. Now, stripped of everything, they finally began to see the truth. Their obsession with protecting her had only destroyed us all. After my parents received their suspended sentence, the calls began relentless, desperate pleas for money. One evening, my mother's trembling voice broke through the line. "Margaret, how can you abandon us like this? We're starving. Do you want us to die?" Her words hit like a storm, but I knew giving in would only perpetuate their cycle of destruction. With shaking hands, I ended the call and buried my face in my palms, tears streaming down uncontrollably. It wasn't just sadness, it was grief for the family we could have been. Diana, now cut off completely, spiraled further into chaos. Without my parents' support, she turned to drugs and reckless schemes, racking up even more debt. One night, driven by desperation, she attempted to break into the vacation home. The security guards caught her red-handed as she tried to pry open a window. When Ken showed me the surveillance footage, I felt a pang of sorrow, but no regret. Diana had always blamed others for her failures, refusing to take responsibility. Helping them now would only enable their downfall. I chose to protect my values, even if it meant losing them forever. Ken held me close that night, whispering, "You're stronger than you think." And for the first time, I believed him. Ken and I decided to transform the vacation home into a sanctuary for underprivileged children, offering them a chance to experience the joy of marine sports. The first charity event brought a group of kids from rural areas, their eyes wide with wonder as they stepped onto the sandy beach. One boy, shy at first, hesitated to try surfing. But after Ken patiently guided him through the basics, the boy stood up on the board for the first time. His face lit up with pure exhilaration. Running back to me, he threw his arms around my waist and exclaimed, "Sister, I've never felt this happy before." Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from fulfillment. This was our dream, turning pain into purpose. But not everyone shared our vision. Diana arrived uninvited, storming into the event like a hurricane. "How dare you flaunt your happiness here?" She screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "You think helping these kids makes you better than us? You're just trying to shame the family." Her words drew stares from the children and volunteers alike. Chaos erupted as she knocked over equipment and shoved past guests. When security intervened, Diana resisted, shouting louder until the police were called to escort her away. Watching her leave, I felt no anger, only sorrow for how far she had fallen. That night, sitting on the deck with Ken, I realized we had truly turned a corner. The vacation home wasn't just ours anymore, it belonged to every child who found laughter in the waves. Our scars became stepping stones, leading others toward hope. On a stormy night, I stood on the balcony of our vacation home, rain lashing against my face as I gazed at the restless sea. Memories flooded back, every sacrifice, every betrayal, every moment of pain. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but they weren't just for sorrow. They were for closure. Ken's arms wrapped around me from behind, his voice soft yet firm. "You did the right thing, Margaret. This is our life, and we'll write it the way we want." His words anchored me, reminding me that I had chosen freedom over chains. Weeks later, news came that Diana had been arrested for her involvement in another massive fraud scheme. My heart ached, but I knew I couldn't save someone unwilling to change. That realization was liberating. It marked the end of guilt and the beginning of true peace. Here, surrounded by waves and hope, I found happiness not in blood ties, but in choices that reflected who I truly am.